The NFL trade deadline has passed. We're talking all the moves that were made and how it impacts the dynasty value of some key players. All and more on today's episode of Locked On Dynasty.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Matt Williamson and Ryan McDowell.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. I'm your host, Ryan McDowell. You can follow me on Twitter at RyanMC23. Joining me, as always, is former NFL scout Matt Williamson. Find Matt on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Matt, the trade deadline has come and passed. We planned and scheduled this show around, and it, as most years, did not live up to the hype. But we had a couple of interesting moves here.
We do, and I just did. We did the same thing with Peacock and Williamson today, where we made it a late show on Tuesday, wanted to make sure it was after the 4 o'clock deadline. Plus, the Steelers play on Thursday, which means I have to cram 5 days of Steelers shows into 3. So my days have been a little crazy. And oh, by that's Halloween. Happy Halloween to all when we're recording this. So, but I thought the biggest story was more defensive, but also the deals that weren't made. Denver not doing anything. Carolina, these really bad teams didn't do a heck of a lot in terms of shipping guys out the door. And I hope for their sake, it's not because some of the bottom feeders won games this past weekend and all of a sudden they think they're right back in it. Denver, we beat the Super Bowl champs. So look out, we're on a tear. I hope they don't see it that way.
Well, I'm afraid they might, at least as far as, maybe we can sneak into the playoffs. Titans in a similar situation. They make no moves either. And we'll maybe get into those teams a little bit more as well. Let's start with the teams that did make some deals focused on or including offensive players. The Vikings go out and get a quarterback. They trade a 6th rounder for Josh Dobbs and a 7th rounder, pull off a deal with the Arizona Cardinals. Of course, on Monday, we heard the news that Dobbs had essentially lost his starting job. It would either be Clayton Tune or Kyler Murray. It was later announced that the rookie Clayton Tune would start in week 9 for Arizona. The Vikings are going with a rookie in week 9 as well. That's Jaron Hall. But we can assume moving forward after week 9, it'll be Josh Dobbs as the starter there. Obviously they were in a tough spot after losing Cousins, but it's a pretty good option, I would say.
Yeah. Real quick, I want to touch on the Cardinals because I think this probably tells us that they have high enough hopes for Clayton Tune that he can be a backup at least for the next 3-4 years, maybe the next 10. Who knows? That he's not just a throwaway. We kind of like this guy for no matter who our starter is, he can hang around. I do think we'll see Murray very, very soon. You wouldn't have started his window if you don't. Whether that means they'll draft a quarterback or put some Murray tape out there and shop him, whatever. But Dobbs, real quick, if you're Minnesota, I think this is about as good as it could have got. You traded, this isn't real fantasy relevant, but they traded Ezra Cleveland basically for what they basically traded Ezra Cleveland for Josh Dobbs, more or less, who's a good guard that became a backup for them after they signed Dalton Risner. So, okay. And what's interesting to me about Dobbs is the Cards basically leased him without costing any money because that's about what they gave up right before the year. And they're the 5th team, I think, that's moved on from him. So it kind of says, yeah, we like you, but we're not going to be brokenhearted that you left. And trust me, he was drafted by the Steelers. He's super smart. And he proved, what's interesting to me most of all this is he proved by going from the Browns right before opening day to the starting quarterback for the Cardinals, he can jump on a moving train, and that's what Minnesota needs him to do. We don't need to groom you. You're smart. A lot of the same verbiage from what I understand. We're kind of riding the fence in terms of, are we a playoff team or not? We didn't invest a ton to do it. And then we can go look at Harrison Smith and Justin Jefferson in the face and still say we got a chance to win on Sundays.
Yeah, and you look at, when the Cardinals made that move to get Dobbs and it became kind of apparent he would be the starter, there were concerns that, this guy's not going to help us fantasy-wise. We've got to give up on Hollywood Brown, ideas like that. And I'm sure I said some of those same things. Mm-hmm. Hollywood Brown has been very good, and part of that, at least, is because of Josh Dobbs. He was adequate, I would say. So
yeah.
If you were ready to give up on Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, Josh Dobbs is not Kirk Cousins. He's not going to be as good as Kirk Cousins, but I think he'll be okay. I think he'll be better than Jaron Hall. We've seen Nick Mullins, better than Nick Mullins. I think he's going to be okay.
Adequate's a good word you used.
Yeah. Adequate is the word for sure. Matt, what about the Cardinals here? Clayton Tune, like I said, starting in week 9, and Kyler due back soon. What are we thinking with Arizona?
So as it stands on Halloween, they own the first overall pick, which many of us expected and took kind of a convoluted way to get there. I don't know that they're going to tank and just do everything possible to keep that pick, because I do think they're going to play Murray, which I think gives them a better chance to win no matter what. But I don't think Marquise Brown or Connor or McBride's a hot pickup right now in redraft. They're going to suffer too much from this. I think they're probably status quo.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We do have we've got some other deals, including the Lions making a move to impact their wide receivers. We're going to talk about that and more next.
So our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer, who does great work. Go check out his podcast as well, to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit in on your roster. So let's check out who Vinny has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. So he went out and grabbed Dalton Kincaid, which I am a big fan of. I think he's primed for a much stronger second half of rookie season. Dawson Knox is out of the way, but Kincaid has stepped into a big role with Knox getting hurt. He's gotten hot with Josh Allen the past 2 weeks, scoring for the first time in his career in week 8 against the Bucs. Kincaid gets a smash spot in a shootout against the Bengals on Sunday night. Cincinnati has been better in coverage outside and versus wideouts than versus tight ends. Kincaid will once again come through for managers looking for midseason pick me up at the position. I'm a big believer. Good call here by Vinny. So they have over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. LED headlights, roof rack, brake kits, all your baby needs, bumpers, whatever you're after, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride for the first time, every time, or your money back. I mean, how do you beat that? Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items apply and exclusions apply.
Football season is here, and Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On NFL Kickoff Live. Each Friday, Locked On will go live at 2 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On NFL YouTube channel. Host Tanitra Batiste, Jarvis Davis, and Kyle Krabs will break down every game on the NFL slate to get you ready for your team's matchup, your fantasy lineups, your betting angles, and more. Plus, get the in-depth local analysis From our stable of NFL hosts across the country who know these teams better than anyone else. And Locked On NFL Kickoff Live every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern on any Locked On NFL YouTube channel. All right, Matt, let's continue here talking about the NFL trade deadline, the moves that were made. Let's move over to the Detroit Lions. Kind of a minor move, I guess you could say. They get Donovan Peoples-Jones from the Cleveland Browns. Give up I believe, a 6th rounder for him. But the concern here is what it says about Jameson Williams. I mean, we've seen him make a couple big plays, certainly, in his time with Detroit. Of course, missed a lot of time last year as he recovered from that ACL, was suspended to start this season, also was dealing with an injury. And honestly, just certainly hasn't been consistent, a consistent weapon. Just worried about Jameson Williams.
It's not great, but so I think we've seen in this offense that the Lions covet or require, neither one of those are the right words, but you get my drift, a long, linear, outside the numbers, deep threat type, DJ Chark, Reynolds fits that mold, kind of an angular guy. And I think Peoples-Jones is in that mold. And he'll probably line up outside the numbers, run a lot of deep routes, and maybe even be an upgrade over Reynolds in that regard. And I'm sure people are going, well, isn't that why they traded up in the first round for Jameson Williams? I mean, he's all that and more. Maybe. But I do think I would describe Williams at this point as untrustworthy at a minimum or slow to come along. But I also think if you give Williams the benefit of the doubt, the Lions are pretty darn good. And that's a handful of an offense to deal with, as the Raiders just found out. And adding one more guy to stretch the field and allow them to get people out of the box, and Williams' insurance makes sense. They didn't give much up. I mean, it wasn't like they gave up a 2nd-round pick for someone just like him,
Right. I saw somebody kind of characterize the trade as essentially saying the Lions are ready to win now, and they simply can't wait for Jameson Williams to develop. So not that they're giving up on Jameson Williams long term, but they need that second option, I guess, if you want to include Laporta in there as a pass catcher, or even Gibbs, honestly. But essentially they needed another pass catching option along with Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I do think this one makes a lot of sense. I mean, I was already worried about Jameson Williams, honestly. So this definitely doesn't help his case, as certainly this season and even long term. I think there's still reason to be worried about him.
I might throw a low ball offer in though right now. I mean, like today or tomorrow, before you even see these guys on the field next.
We can't go lower than a 2nd, right? As far as if you're thinking draft picks.
Right. If I think it's a late 2nd, I would make that move.
Okay. Cleveland, it's interesting that they moved on from DPJ. Of course, he wasn't playing a ton. He wasn't super productive, but they don't have a ton of receivers either. They did draft Cedric Tillman. We haven't seen much of him at all. Do you think this is a situation where he could see playing now and actually kind of get on the field and see what he can do?
Yeah, their receiver room outside of Amari Cooper has been kind of a mystery / disappointment. I expected more out of Elijah Moore. Their quarterback situation hasn't helped things, obviously. But maybe that is the writing on the wall. I mean, I haven't read this from beat reporters or anything, but maybe Tillman is just too good to keep off the field. I mean, I think you did, but I did as well. We're quite high on him coming out of school. And yeah, I mean, I don't know that he's done anything to hurt my opinion of him. Maybe behind the scenes, he's been pretty darn good, and they realized they could get a pick for DPJ, and let's get Tillman rolling.
Yeah, it's been certainly a frustrating start for Tillman and his career. And as you said, um, even Elijah Moore has honestly just not been good yet. Hasn't made much of an impact. David Njoku has been a bit of a disappointment this year as well. And of course, this all goes back to Deshaun Watson and the mystery that is
Sure.
whatever's going on with him. Injury is obviously part of it, but I think there's probably more there. So if Cedric Tillman, Elijah Moore, and the Browns can get things turned around. Matt, you mentioned the kind of the bigger deals of the day came at the defensive position. I do want to touch on those. We never have pretended to be IDP guys, but of course the 49ers get Chase Young for not just a third, but essentially one of the last third round picks will be likely outside of the top 100. It's a compensatory pick that they will earn for a staff loss, I believe, or a coaching loss. And then the Bears make the deal. Second year in a row, they've traded a second rounder. This time they get Montez Sweat instead of Chase Claypool. I think this one will work out a lot better for them, I expect. But it's going to be a high pick. This is going to be a top 35, 38 pick overall for Sweat. What did you think of those moves specifically for the 49ers, what it does for them as strong contenders?
Yeah, and for those who don't know, Brian Peacock, my co-host, is also the host of Locked On 49ers. So go check that out. He has a lot of good insights on there. I mentioned on that podcast that the Niners defensive line coach is kind of a legend, and Young's kind of been getting by on talent more than technique. So this might be really good for him and the Niners. If it goes great, you could franchise him, but probably just renting him for a third, and they hope to get a third back in the comp game. I think Chicago's in a much different boat where I think you trade for Sweat with the intent of extending him. They have a ton of cap space. San Francisco doesn't, or franchising him. And you look at those two early Bear picks, one may or may not be a quarterback. I mean, but there aren't edge rushers that are in the Chase Young, Myles Garrett mold coming out of school. So you had to get one and you had the cap space. So I think this adds up for them. I do think it's kind of interesting for the Commanders, though, in that new ownership. I expect there to be a new coach there. I think they just want to give the new group, and Peacock mentioned this, that in a 76ers manner, which is out of my expertise to say the least, of just giving as many picks as to the new group as possible so they can make their decisions as opposed to inheriting a big contract or, a former first rounder.
Yeah, I believe both Young and Sweat were due to be paid new deal pretty soon. It did, those deals were both a little bit earlier in the day. They didn't come down to the deadline like some of the others. So that actually gave me some hope that we might see an Antonio Gibson deal, a Curtis Samuel deal. Of course, neither of those get done. I think you're right as far as Washington's just looking ahead more long-term, which makes sense for them. Matt, you mentioned earlier a couple of teams that did not make moves and why that is noteworthy. We're going to continue that conversation. We'll do that next.
So I've told you guys about Game Time, and it's something that my son and I actually both used recently. I used the Game Time app to go to Guns N' Roses with a buddy of mine at the last minute, and my son got on the subway one for the Steeler Monday Nighter not that long ago and realized he really didn't have tickets. So we set that up, and they figured it all out on the way in there. It's that easy. I mean, so you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next event. Game Time is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for, like I said, sports, music, as well as comedy, theater, all sorts of events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, which is pretty cool, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They have flash deals. They have zone deals, views from all seats in the venue. As I mentioned, that's very cool, too. They have a lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, all sorts of good stuff like that. And What's cool too is that you often hear with these ticket people that you'll get hit with all sorts of fees and taxes and stuff like that late in the process, but they have all-in prices that show your total up front, so you're getting a great deal without hidden fees. You can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. So, and I mentioned the zone deals. You just pick the section, and Game Time picks the seats for an average of 18% savings. So they have all kinds of good stuff going on. Here's what we need you to do. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. The terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
Matt, we're talking NFL trade deadline, and unfortunately, it was mostly quiet, specifically quiet. Tennessee Titans, Derrick Henry, even Ryan Tannehill, who of course is injured, had been mentioned, and DeAndre Hopkins as well, had all been mentioned as possible trade candidates. None of them get moved. The Titans, of course, did win last week. They win the game with Will Levis, and I believe they're 3-5 now. I think that's correct.
I think so. Yeah.
Maybe they have some of this confidence that in a bad division, maybe they can sneak up and cause some trouble. What did you think of Tennessee's lack of movement here?
Yeah, I mean, I do think Vrabel's DNA is not trade Henry, Tannehill, and I mean, it's going to be fight and claw. But they did this trade Kevin Byard, who's a really good player.
The combination of those surprised me, and that they would, Byard, but then didn't do anything else.
Yeah, you'd think it'd be one or the other. It makes me wonder. I mean, they actually come here to Pittsburgh Thursday night. I mean, that's a winnable game for them. Did they think of it as, I think all of us assumed, okay, the Will Levis era is here. He had a big statistical game, throwing bombs to Nuke Hopkins. But maybe Vrabel's like, well, let's see if Levis can keep us afloat, and then our man Tannehill comes back, and we can be a playoff team. I don't tend to agree with them, but I guess I understand that line is. Yeah, I mean, I guess I understand that line of thinking. I would have sold. I don't quite understand this move.
I mean, I do. I'm with you. I do think a lot of this is Vrabel. And honestly, I mean, I trust him more than I trust most NFL coaches as far as getting the most out of his players, having more success than maybe would be expected. So I get that piece of it. I don't think I can say the same thing for the Denver Broncos. Of course, they get the big win. You mentioned earlier over Kansas City last week. They keep Sutton, they keep Judy, they keep everybody. What are we doing with old Mel? Are we going to have to wait until 2024 to see him?
I think. Well, who knows? Yeah. I mean, I guess the wheels could really come off, but I don't know what they're thinking. I mean, I thought guys like Simmons, the safety, would be gone. All the big ticket items. I mean, everybody implied that Peyton doesn't want to inherit anything. I'm going to be the czar and just make all the picks, and this will be my team. And didn't go that way. I mean, I really hope they didn't have the hubris to think, hey, we beat the Chiefs. They were Super Bowl champs. We can hang with anyone. Look out for the Broncos. Same with Tennessee for that matter. Same for a lot of teams that won him, this past week that aren't particularly good. I guess there is another component of this. And do we know the teams really coveted Sutton and Judy and some of these other guys? Like, I do think teams had interest in Derrick Henry, but I also think Vrabel and the Titans owner have a pretty bad taste in their mouth from the A.J. Brown trade. Like, we just traded this guy, and now he's hoisting Super Bowl trophies. And, like Henry in a Ravens uniform with a ring doesn't sit well, I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing it out there, but I do think that's stings them a little bit.
Yeah, the Ravens reportedly did make an offer for Derrick Henry. Also reportedly made an offer for Josh Jacobs. That was another team that did nothing. We saw them on Monday night. Yeah, it looked terrible. Devontae Adams clearly frustrated. I think there was hope after that Monday night game that he would be so frustrated that the team would end up moving him. Of course, that did not happen either. Jacobs, Adams, and everyone else still in Vegas and still in that Raiders uniform, for better or for worse. I saw just a stat of how bad really Devontae Adams has been. Less than 30 fantasy points over the past month combined. Really, really frustrating. Of course, that all goes back to that quarterback play and the offense in general. Honestly, I can't believe Josh McDaniels is still a head coach in this league.
It's amazing.
Every time I see him on the sideline, it's just a reminder of how is that guy still around? But
I don't think much longer.
Probably not. We are getting to the point of the season where some of these coaches do get fired. It's always interesting to see those in-season moves, and I don't think he'll be one of them. They seem like they're pretty patient for whatever reason, but heads are going to start rolling pretty soon around the league. That's going to do it for today's show. Please make sure you download and subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. Remember to follow the show at Locked On Dynasty. Follow Matt at Williamson NFL, and I'm Ryan, MC23. We'll be back next time with more Locked On Dynasty.